here today to talk about the Canadian government and how Canada came to be with that governmental system.
Canada's development and governmental system is very different from the United States. There were mostly Aboriginals there until about 1000 AD. Vikings were the first Europeans to arrive in Canada. They only remained for a short period of time and soon after left. In 1497, Italian John Carbo claimed Canada as a territory of Great Britain. In the mid-1600s, fur trappers played a major role in Canada. They settled mostly around the Great Lakes. Later, one of the French and Indian Wars, Nova Scotia was allotted to Britain with the 1713 Treaty of Utrecht. The Treaty of Paris, 1763, ceded Canada and most of New France to Britain after the 7 Years' War. It wasn't until 1867 that it was recognized independent of Britain. However, it still had many ties with it constitutionally, and things still had to be passed by Britain before they ever became official in Canada. Finally, in 1982, a new act was passed that allowed them to amend their own constitution without British involvement.
Because Canada worked off of Britain's constitution for so long, they had to go through the British Parliament to make amendments. However, after the adoption of the Constitution Act in 1982, the Canadian government had more control over their own constitution, and amendments could now be passed. But they were only able to be passed if identical resolutions were, are, adopted by the House of Commons, the Senate, and two-thirds majority of the legislative assemblies that represent at least 50% of the national population. The Canadian Constitution is generally understood to comprise both the Constitution Act of 1867, which is also known as the British North America Act, and the Constitution Act of 1982. But the Canadian Constitution is more than just these two statutes. Section 52 of the Constitution Act of 1982 says that the 30 or so legislative texts and orders are also part of Canada's Constitution. These texts are amendments brought to the Constitution Act of 1867. The Canadian Constitution evolves constantly. Since 1982, it's been amended on many occasions. These amendments are also considered part of the Constitution. The Canadian Constitution also includes various customary rules that are not found in any legislative text. This relates to the duties of the Prime Minister of Canada.
This brings us to the legislative branch. So the legislative branch is divided into two parts, the Senate and the House of Commons. The upper house is the Senate, and Senate members are appointed by Governor General based off recommendations by the Prime Minister. All senators remain so until the age of 75. The House of Commons members are elected by the people. They are essentially the people and hold the most power.
The executive branch serves to implement and enforce the laws and regulations created by the legislative branch. The executive branch is composed of the Queen of England, since Canada is still part of the Commonwealth, and she's represented by what's called the Governor General. Also included in the executive branch is the Cabinet and the Administration. The Cabinet is made up of high-ranking members of the government, like the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is similar to our President, but instead of being separate from the legislative branch, he's actually a part of it. Prime Ministers are chosen by voters who elect members to fill the 308 seats of the House of Commons. The member with the most votes is automatically installed as the Prime Minister. But the Prime Minister can also be appointed through what's called an internal appointment. If a current Prime Minister dies or resigns, members of his political party assemble and elect one of their own to serve as an acting Prime Minister. Resignations are common since there is no term limit in Canada, and since Canadian elections are not held on fixed dates. Finally, concluding the executive branch is the administration, which is made up of all government departments, including the armed forces.
The judicial branch serves by interpreting and applying laws. It consists of judges and the court systems like the United States. This branch operates independently from the other branches. Judges are appointed either federally or provincially, but 3 judges must be appointed from Quebec, based off a Supreme Court Act.
At the federal level, Canada has not been tested much with crises, but the October crisis helped prove what the Canadian government was willing to do to preserve itself and its state. In 1963, Le Front de Libération du Québec was founded. It's a national liberation movement, also known as the FLQ, and its goal was to achieve independence of Quebec, even if that meant resorting to terrorism. After a few bombings, the FLQ orchestrated the abduction of a British diplomat named James Richard Cross, as well as a provincial minister named Pierre Laporte. As a result of the abductions, the federal government enacted the War Measures Act. As a result, civil rights were curtailed and the Canadian Armed Forces occupied multiple Quebec cities. The next day, Laporte was assassinated by the FLQ. Up to 500 people were subsequently arrested without a warrant. The majority of these people supported Quebec nationalism. Finally, in December, the crisis came to an end when Cross was released and the FLQ members were granted safe passage out of Canada. They never really achieved their goal, but the federal government proved their willingness to use force to maintain their power.
With few crises and the federal government's overall willingness to work for the people, the majority of Canadians are very happy with their government. The main reason why Canadians are so supportive of their government is because of the Canadian healthcare plan. The Canadian government spends about $6,000 a year per citizen on healthcare, and doctors won't turn patients away. As a result, Canada has been listed in the top 5 happiest countries in the world for the past 15 years. In a 2011 poll, when Canadians were asked if they were satisfied with their government, 58% said yes. The same poll was conducted in the USA, except the result was only 25% satisfaction. Despite growing issues in Canada like obesity rates, growing carbon emissions, and deficit, Canadians remain happy due to their health care.
The biggest problem Canadians have is not having enough healthcare facilities and workers. They're trying to catch up, but still many Canadian doctors are flocking to the US where they can make millions because of our system here. Many Canadians also enjoy the tight gun control laws that they have there, and Canadians also uphold a high standard of living, like the United States, which overall keeps citizens very happy. Three.
And that's the way the Canadian cookie crumbles.